In the early spring of 1922, in the rural heart of Bavaria, Germany, roughly 70 kilometers north of Munich, a remote farmstead known as Hinterkaifeck became the stage for one of history's most disturbing unsolved crimes. On the evening of March 31st, 6 people, 5 members of the Gruber family and their newly hired maid, were brutally murdered. A calculated act of violence that, more than a century later, still defies explanation. What sets this case apart isn't only its brutality, it's the chilling string of omens that preceded it, the cold precision of the killings themselves, and one almost unbelievable detail. The perpetrator didn't flee. They stayed. For days, someone lived among the dead, eating the family's food, tending their animals, lighting their fires, as if nothing had happened at all. Today, the Hinterkaifeck murders remain one of Germany's most haunting cold cases, a story where history, family secrets, and unrelenting mystery collide. The Hinterkaifeck farm sat behind the tiny hamlet of Kaifeck, hemmed in by dense forest, isolated even by the standards of post-World War I rural Bavaria. It was home to Andreas Gruber, a 63-year-old farmer with a stern, guarded reputation. His wife, Cecilia, 72. Their widowed daughter, Victoria Gabriel, 35. Victoria's 2 children, 7-year-old Cecilia and 2-year-old Joseph. And as of that very day, a new maid named Maria Baumgartner, 44. The family kept to themselves, and that secrecy bred rumor. Years earlier, Andreas and Victoria had been convicted of an incestuous relationship, and whispers about young Joseph's true paternity never fully went away. In the shadow of the Great War, isolated farms like this one often hid private griefs and darker secrets behind ordinary farm life. Hinterkaifeck, it would turn out, was hiding something far worse. Weeks before the murders, strange things began happening. The Gruber's previous maid had quit months earlier, insisting the house was haunted. She described disembodied footsteps in the attic and the constant, unshakable feeling of being watched. Andreas Gruber documented it himself. He found footprints in the fresh snow leading from the edge of the forest straight to the farm's machine shed, but none leading back out. A Munich newspaper turned up on the property that nobody in the household had bought. House keys vanished without explanation. One night, the family heard footsteps directly overhead in the attic. Andreas searched the entire space. He found no one. Whoever or whatever it was, it seemed to know the property intimately. Victoria reportedly fled into the woods at one point after a frightening confrontation. By the time March 31st arrived, the family was living under a quiet, mounting dread, as if something had been watching them from the trees for weeks. Futzinger. On the afternoon of March 31st, 1922, Maria Baumgartner arrived at Hinterkaifeck for her very first day of work, walked over briefly by her sister. By evening, the household had settled into what should have been an unremarkable night. The killer struck with chilling precision, someone who clearly knew the farm's layout. Investigators believe the 4 adults and the eldest child were lured to the barn one at a time, possibly by a disturbance among the animals. There, using the family's own mattock, a heavy pickaxe-like farm tool, the attacker delivered devastating blows to each victim's head. The court physician's later autopsy revealed the full horror: shattered skulls, star-shaped wounds, signs that some victims had been strangled as well as struck. Most disturbing of all, 7-year-old Cecilia did not die instantly. She survived for hours afterward, lying in the straw, having torn out clumps of her own hair in agony before finally succumbing. The killer then moved into the farmhouse itself, killing 2-year-old Joseph in his bassinet and Maria Baumgartner in her bedroom, both by the same blunt force violence. The bodies in the barn were loosely covered with hay, the ones inside the house with bedding or clothing. It was as if the killer was trying in some twisted way to tidy up. But the most disturbing part of this story hadn't happened yet. Because whoever did this, it didn't leave. In 1922, on an isolated Bavarian farm, 6 people were murdered in a single night, lured one by one into the barn and killed with their own farm tool. But the killer didn't run. For days, they stayed on the property, living among the bodies. Here's where the case stops being merely brutal and becomes genuinely disturbing. The killer did not run. For 3 or 4 days afterward, someone remained on the farm, feeding the livestock, eating the family's food, keeping fires burning in the hearth, maintaining the illusion that life at Hinterkaifeck carried on as normal. Neighbors later recalled smoke rising from the chimney during those days. One local even crossed paths with a stranger near the property, who deliberately turned away and hid his face behind a lantern. Suspicion only grew when young Cecilia missed school, and the family didn't show up for church. On April 4th, neighbors led by local farmer Lorenz Schlittenbauer finally went to check on them. What they found in the barn, and then in the farmhouse, would haunt the region for generations. By the time investigators arrived, the crime scene was already ruined. Curious neighbors had wandered through the property, moved the bodies, even cooked meals in the kitchen, destroying whatever physical evidence might have existed. Over the following decades, more than 100 suspects would be questioned. Not one was ever convicted. The case was formally closed in 1955, but it never really went away. It was reopened in 1986, and again in 2007, when police academy students re-examined the surviving evidence with modern forensic eyes, even attempting DNA testing on degraded samples. Without success, so who did it? Suspicion has clustered around several names over the past century. Lorenz Schlittenbauer, the man who found the bodies, was suspected almost immediately, and for good reason. He had a complicated history with Victoria and unresolved financial disputes with the family. He was never charged. He spent years afterward successfully suing people for slander anytime they called him the killer in public, right up until his death in 1941. Then there's the case of Carl Gabriel, Victoria's husband, officially killed in action in France in 1914. His body was never recovered. After World War II, released German prisoners of war claimed that a German-speaking Soviet officer had confided to them that he was the real Hinterkaifeck killer, fueling decades of speculation that Carl Gabriel never actually died, and instead returned in secret to discover his wife's incestuous secret and exact a horrifying revenge. American author Bill James, in his book on serial killers of the era, has even proposed a wilder theory, that the murders were the work of a drifter named Paul Muller, a suspect tied to a string of unsolved axe murders across the United States and Europe in the early 20th century, meaning Hinterkaifeck might not have been an isolated act of family vengeance at all, but one stop in a much longer trail of bodies. And then there's the detail almost too strange to believe. The victims' skulls were removed and sent to Munich, where they were examined, not by doctors, but by clairvoyants. Psychics brought in to search for metaphysical clues to the killer's identity. Those skulls were later lost entirely during the chaos of World War II, closing the door on any future forensic breakthrough, forever. When the farm was demolished in 1923, workers uncovered even more buried evidence. A second blood-stained mattock hidden in the attic. A penknife buried in the barn's hay, physical proof that whoever committed this crime had taken the time to hide the evidence carefully before finally walking away. The Hinterkaifeck farmhouse itself was torn down within a year, as if erasing the building might erase the horror that happened inside it. Only a small stone memorial marks where it once stood, but the questions were never demolished along with it. A century later, we still don't know who walked out of that forest, why they stayed for days afterward living among 6 corpses, or why they vanished without a single trace. The Hinterkaifeck murders remain a reminder that even the quietest, most ordinary corners of the world can hide something patient, watching, and utterly without mercy.